Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be doing another episode on the series of pro versus anti-Israel candidates. And for today, we're going to be using James Talarico, the current Texas candidate for Senate in the 2026 midterms. He will be used as the anti-Israel candidate in today's video. He's not the most friendliest. And then Glenn Youngkin is obviously the pro-Israel candidate. I think Glenn Youngkin's a very strong candidate, and James Talarico is an uprising star among the Democratic Party. We'll see if he falls off, similar to Beto O'Rourke. I think you can compare him to someone like Beto, who came within 2 points of actually flipping the Senate against Ted Cruz in 2018. And I don't really see this as one candidate is clearly better than the other. I actually see this as two are strong, but Glenn Youngkin might be a little too strong, even though James Talarico is still a decent Democratic candidate. Now, name recognition in terms of that's still up in the air. He doesn't have the best name recognition, and Glenn Youngkin used to serve as the governor of Virginia, so I think he has the advantage and edge in terms of name recognition. So before we get started, make sure you guys are subscribed, click the bell so you don't miss all my content, press the like button, share this video. Don't forget we have memberships. If you're interested with that, you can find links to that in the description section. So let's start off with the lean states, because in fact with this map currently for this scenario, I don't believe or think there will be any likely states for either of these candidates, so we're just going to move on straight to lean. So Texas, since James Talarico is the candidate for Senate here, and he has the better advantage, I would say, in Texas. Still not going to be enough to win. Texas voted for Trump by 14 points. I don't see Glenn Youngkin not doing good in this state. I think he will do good in this state, actually. But because Talarico obviously is literally in campaigning in Texas, that's going to bring Democrats an advantage for 2028 in the state of Texas. On top of that, you can assume that Californians move to Texas, trending the state more blue, even though it was very red in 2024. And also factors like immigration not being that much of a factor since border crossings all-time low. That's not going to bring enthusiasm among the GOP as it did in 2024. That was insane. I mean, you saw Arizona go to Trump by 5 percentage points. Overestimating my prediction, and but it was in par with some of the polling data. Actually, in 2025, polls underestimated Democratic support. You saw Abigail Svansberger overperform, which was actually shocking because usually they overestimate Democrats instead. So Texas, lean instead of likely, just because Talarico is the candidate here. He's gonna have to do good in Texas, and I believe he will. He outperformed everyone in the race in terms of the primaries, not just Jasmine Crockett, but also the two Republican candidates. He outperformed literally everybody. So it's not like he's a bad candidate. I think he's an uprising star among the Democratic Party. We'll see if he fades away like someone like Beto O'Rourke and says that he's going to take away all your guns and whatnot. But aside from that, Arizona, also lean red state. I think Glenn Youngkin's a very good candidate for a state like Arizona. He has good ties with the MAGA base, obviously, which has been losing support ever since the Iranian war. But aside from that, he does good with both people. Neocons, establishment, moderate Republicans, MAGA Republicans, you name it. So it's not like he's only friendly towards this or that. No. Glenn Youngkin can do unilateral things among the Republican Party. I think he's very good to unite the GOP base. That's why Glenn Youngkin should be a very good candidate for states like Arizona, his own home state of Virginia, and even states like North Carolina. I expect Glenn Youngkin to perform very well in some of those states. I think James Talarico should struggle in the rest, but which is why I think Pennsylvania would actually be a lean red state. In this matchup scenario, specifically Talarico versus Youngkin, I think Youngkin wins Pennsylvania by about the same margin Trump did in 2028. By about a couple points, 2 points. I know Trump had that failed assassination attempt. It really boosted his support, but I just think Glenn Youngkin is that good of a candidate. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not that Talarico is bad at all. No, it's more so that Glenn Youngkin is just too much of a good candidate. He's going to do so well among independent voters. So North Carolina is another state I mentioned. I think that's also lean for Youngkin. I expect Youngkin to actually do better in North Carolina than Donald Trump did. I know this should be a more favorable year for Democrats, but still, I think Youngkin is just better than Donald Trump. I think he's more electable. Kamala Harris was just so bad of a candidate, it doesn't really matter at this point. I think she was the only candidate in, a long time? Or ever to not flip a single county? I mean, come on. That's insane. So North Carolina, I expect to go to Glenn Youngkin by about 4 percentage points. So that's the lean states for him. Now, on the other side, James Talarico, his lean states, I don't think there will be any. I think we're going to move on to the tilt. So for James Talarico, I think Minnesota is going to be a tilt state. I think Glenn Youngkin can actually perform good in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is not a state that likes populist candidates at all. I mean, you take a look at Donald Trump. He ran 3 times, lost it all 3 times. Matter of fact, Kamala Harris performed better than Hillary Clinton. Now, I understand that she selected Tim Walz as her VP. Now, that makes sense. That's why she performed better than Hillary Clinton in the state of Minnesota. But Minnesota is a state that likes establishment type of candidates, your average Democrat. So I think James Talarico is not your average Democrat, which is why he may struggle in a state like Minnesota. And Glenn Youngkin is a moderate Republican. He's good towards the MAGA base, which is a populist base, but he's also good with the moderates as well. So I think Glenn Youngkin actually has a chance to do very well in the state of Minnesota. Still not going to be enough to flip it. And the main reason why is because Reagan won every single state besides one, and he still fell short in Minnesota. I just don't see any Republican winning Minnesota anytime soon, even if it's such a strong candidate as Glenn Youngkin. And I know I keep hyping Glenn Youngkin up, like ever since the 2024 election. Ever since I've been covering the 2024 election just a couple years ago, I've always been hyping up Glenn Youngkin as a future 2028 Republican nominee for president. I think he gives Republicans the best chances because you see what's happening now with the Iranian war. J.D. Vance's hopes are going down. Marco Rubio is seen as such a pro-Israel candidate. It's not going to help. And I know Glenn Youngkin is also supports Israel and whatnot, but still, he's just way better than any other Republican. He is the former governor of Virginia. That's a state that just voted for a Democratic governor by over 10 percentage points. Virginia is a blue swing state. I know it's called a battleground state, but Harris, out of all people, still won this state by 5 points. I think she actually overperformed, in my opinion. So Virginia is a very blue state, even though it's considered a battleground state. So I think that's very impressive for someone like Glenn Youngkin. And speaking about Virginia, I'm going to characterize it tilt blue for Talarico. You may be surprised I don't have Glenn Youngkin winning his own state that he won the governorship in. Is because the governorship, you can't compare that to the general election. Those are 2 completely different things. So if you're going to be governor in the state, you still may not win that state because, if it's that blue and you're Republican, you're Glenn Youngkin. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you're going to win it. So I think Talarico is not the best candidate for a state like Virginia. They like more of establishment type of candidates. They reject the populism. That's why Obama actually, I think, underperformed Joe Biden in 2020 in this state. So I think Virginia, George Bush did perform very well in the state of Virginia. So I think Glenn Youngkin has a really realistic chance at winning Virginia. He was obviously the governor in the state. So you're probably expecting that he does win. But I'm going to be nice to Talarico. I'm going to be generous and say that he narrowly pulls off the victory in Virginia just because of shifts and trends. And, Glenn Youngkin only won by just a couple points, 1 to 2%. That wasn't really that great. In a governor's race, this is a general election. It can easily go to James Talarico. And then Nevada, I'm going to characterize it tilt for Glenn Youngkin. I think James Talarico can perform better in parts like Clark County, the Vegas area, compared to someone like Kamala Harris. I think James Talarico can do very well with the youth vote, Gen Z, whatnot. Glenn Youngkin is still a good candidate, but, that might not work out in Nevada. He's still going to win it, though, so it does work out. But I think James Talarico is an uprising star in the Democratic Party. People don't, they need to get to know him first. That's why he's only running for Senate. And then in Georgia, I kept going back and forth. I gave it to Talarico, and then I gave it to Glenn Youngkin. I'm going to say Glenn Youngkin wins by a tilt amount. I really want to characterize this Democrat because I think most Democrats running in 2028 will win Georgia. Like, that's my honest opinion, just because it's going to be a blue state in the future. It's already shown that way. Trump, did so well in 2024, and the one state that shocked me was Georgia. Kamala Harris did so, she didn't win this state, but but she came within 2 points of doing so, and I think that was enough. Considering that she didn't flip any single county, and she still managed to come within 2 points in Georgia, is surprising. And that goes to show you the real trends in the demographic shifts, especially in the Atlanta metropolitan area, the suburbs as well, among African American voters. I think Talarico will struggle among African American voters. It showed in the primaries. That makes sense because he was going up against Jasmine Crockett. Obviously, she was going to do better. But I think he may struggle a bit. Glenn Youngkin can do very well with the Brian Kemp style voters. Georgians would prefer Brian Kemp over someone like Donald Trump in a general election, obviously. So I think Youngkin can be friendly towards that base, which is why it's going to be tilt red. Wisconsin. I think this state, I know I said the Rust Belt states would go to Glenn Youngkin very favorably, but I think with the exception of Wisconsin, it'll go to James Talarico by a tilt amount. Kamala Harris almost won this state. I think Wisconsin's a weird state. It's really tricky because it usually votes to the right of the three. In 2024, Wisconsin actually voted to the left of Michigan and Pennsylvania, which nobody was expecting. And Door County actually still went to Harris, and she lost the state. Because in the last 5 elections, whatever Door County goes, the entire state will do the same thing. In 2024, that did not end up being the case. And the 3 Rust Belt states typically never split apart at all. They never break apart from each other. So you would probably think that if Glenn Youngkin wins Pennsylvania, he's going to win the rest. In 2028, I think that might change a bit. And you might see Wisconsin and Michigan go blue, and then maybe perhaps Pennsylvania go red. But I'm still going to say that Michigan would go to Glenn Youngkin. I just don't think that Talarico is that good of a Rust Belt candidate aside from Wisconsin, just because it's a tricky state and Harris performed decently well despite losing the state. And then New Hampshire, the last and final state with its 4 electoral votes. This may be surprising a bit, but I'm going to say that Glenn Youngkin will flip the state of New Hampshire in the year of 2028 if he ends up going up, winning the nomination and going up against James Talarico. I think James Talarico has an average shot. If he ends up not becoming senator and running in 2028, which is exactly what Beto O'Rourke did, which is why I want to compare him, which Beto O'Rourke was not a good candidate at all in the Democratic primaries for 2019. But if that ends up being the case, there's a real slick chance Talarico does get the nomination because Gavin Newsom is hated among the Democratic base. You have someone like, Josh Shapiro, who's very pro-Israel. That's not going to work out too good for him. Maybe someone like Gretchen Whitmer, but then they'll say, they want a male instead. And then AOC, that's just going to split the votes, really. That's what's really going to happen. So Talarico, he might poll like top 5 in 2020 if he decides to run. Maybe he won't run. He's really young. But if that's the case, New Hampshire, I see Glenn Youngkin winning just because it's that state really fits a candidate like Glenn Youngkin. I think New Hampshire voters would like Glenn Youngkin. I think people that voted for Harris could actually vote for Youngkin over someone like Talarico in the state of New Hampshire specifically in 2028. So that's pretty much it. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. This is the map between Glenn Youngkin and James Talarico in the 2028 presidential election. 306 electoral votes to 232. I could see Georgia going blue, but aside from that, that's still not going to be enough as Youngkin gets 290 electoral votes, even if you flip Georgia's 16 electoral votes. Please subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss on my content, press the like button, share this video. Don't forget we have memberships. If you're interested, you can find links in the description section. Thank you everyone for watching.